You see that a lot of fear is cloaked as morality, weak morality. Nietzsche talks about it a lot, but probably I can just cover it in the upcoming videos. But this weak sense of morality is the most powerful force in a weak society, which likes to just moral police a lot without doing anything of worth in their lives. And the crowd always keeps on defending the system. People defend the systems that hurt them, not because they benefit from it, but because admitting harm that the system is exploiting us would collapse their sense of identity. If the system is wrong, their obedience was meaningless. They would go into a sort of existential crisis. There would not be any meaning in their life. They'll then start understanding that the suffering, all of the suffering that they had suffered in their life, was unnecessary. So we just like, yo guys, namaskaram. So today I wanted to talk about shame. It's already been 6 days into the new year, 7 I believe, and still I'm sure a lot of you might have given up. I think a predominant reason for it might be shame, lack of discipline, and whatnot. But today I wanted to just explore this topic, that how people make us feel shame so that they can control us. See, it's not embarrassment, it's not humility, it's not even morality. It's a psychological state where a person's sense of self is attacked, not their actions per se. So when someone feels shame, they don't think I did something wrong. They think something is wrong with me. This distinction matters because you see, behavior, your actions can be corrected, but when your sense of self is attacked, you feel fragile from an identity perspective and you start seeking protection, start hiding or surrendering. And this is what exploiters, manipulators, narcissists use to keep you in control. Because any person can change their behavior provided they take the correct steps. So in Atomic Habits, there's a very famous saying that once you believe deep in your heart that you're that person, whatever you want to become from an identity perspective, actions would follow. Or if I have to use it from this perspective, corrective actions from the right center would follow in your day-to-day life, or corrective behavior. When you're made to feel shame, it collapses your heart within. It hurts the individual inward, and broken individuals are very easy to manage. Now let's understand the distinction between shame and guilt. Guilt is something wherein you feel that you can first of all reflect certain things and then take conscious actions to repair those sorts of behaviors, which can then change your direction in life. Whereas an ashamed person wants relief, not truth. Relief comes from either you become obedient to your exploiter, you start conforming to them, or you start seeking their approval, becoming a slave in the process. So it's a very subtle trick, but probably since a lot of us are entering New Year's, I don't want you that you yourself are made to feel this specific emotion, because then it's easier to control you. So that is why our whole system, or systems in general, subtly discouraged guilt-based accountability, wherein you're given chances to reflect, repair. But you see that a lot of shame is promoted, a lot of shame-based identity. Oh, you have done this. What would people think about you, and all of that? Because see, if you are genuinely guilty, you would start repairing your sense of being. But our exploiters, or let's say the system, does not want it. The system wants you to be weak, does not want you to strengthen yourself so that you can be controllable and tameable. Shame dissolves your sense of self and you can easily be controlled. So this is what happens in propaganda and things like that. They instill a lot of shame in them, and then they're easily controllable in whatever capacity they can be. Right now we live in a culture where being outright violent, wherein you are fighting, you're trying to delete someone, is not encouraged, and probably you'll be behind bars if you go into such acts. But shame is like this subtle tactic which people use so that you can be controlled on a subtle level. See, violence requires a lot of energy, enforcement from the outside things, a lot of resources, and let's say if there's a backlash of sorts, even managing that. But shame requires none of that. Violence creates enemies, shame creates participants. People want to willingly participate. Let's say if they are made to being shameful for their behavior and whatnot, they'll willingly participate and be obedient to you. But if one is very violent, he'll definitely create enemies in the long run. So when it is applied correctly, people start rationalizing injustice. Oh, he or she deserved it, the system is such. They'll start justifying the system, which then makes the exploiter just run out of any accountability and never be caught. The whole shame ecosystem attacks people. Let's say if you become a participant with the system, it attacks people who are just questioning the system because you want to feel responsible that you're doing something of worth, even though you haven't done anything of worth in your life. But this is a very genuine tool which is used by your exploiter. And you might have also seen a pattern that it's always social, that is, in the eyes of public. It's never on a private one-to-one level. It only works in your relation to others. You're not ashamed alone. You're ashamed before an imagined audience. The audience may not even be real, but it has been installed in your mind. Common examples like, what would people say? This looks bad. Don't embarrass us. So it does not becomes about ethics. It becomes about that you're not visible in a way that exposes them and brings a sort of surveillance upon them. Now, let's go on some childhood patterns that, first of all, our parents only instill that shame within us. It's our schooling systems because no one teaches it explicitly. These are like subtle rules of behavior that you learn once you start working your way in life. Children learn early that approval, wherein our teachers' approval, our parents' approval, means safety from a psychological level. If I disapprove, it means danger. People would come after me and things like that. So the more you oblige to, let's say, the teachers, the people in power, it becomes more of a good boy, good girl. But if you're genuinely curious in your own pursuits, it becomes this sort of disobedience that you're just trying to walk your own path now. So you see, the more different you are, the more of a defect piece you're treated. And there's a famous saying, I was reading some Japanese literature wherein they say that the nail that is out from a wall, it's the first nail that gets taken down. So these same patterns go in your adulthood and things like that, because through adulthood, due to these repeated learnings from your childhood, authority does not need to intervene. The individual already has learned the art to shrink themselves, live a life in which they are very comfortable with the lowness and the falseness that exists within them. And they think that I'll go against the system, I'll disappoint certain people, even though they are imaginary. Like, what would happen to them? I would displease them, and all of that. And then once you start internalizing this sort of shame, you see patterns as to how you self sabotage yourself or start self policing yourself. There's a voice in your head that always says that no matter how much I try to improve in my life, there would be nothing that would change within my life. So, see, the most efficient population is one that polices itself, because the more obedient you are, the easier it is for you to become a mob. Shame is this effective tool which turns people into their own critics, into their own guards, into their own judges, and into their own suppressors. People stop asking that, is this true? They start asking, is this acceptable to the common eye? Even though, let's say, someone wants to become an artist, he or she would kill that choice consciously because it's not acceptable in the common crowd and things like that. At that point, to become an individual thinker, it requires a sort of rebelliousness in your heart. But who wants to think? Everyone just wants to follow pre-written narratives and perform to the best of their ability. That's why we, I think, in our society, value a lot of performance-based, theatric-based metrics and things like that. And then it's very accessible in all the crowds. You see that it is very contagious, this emotion. Once any group for that matter senses that a belief, a question, or behavior is risky, its own members start enforcing conformity proactively, which basically means that the crab mentality, if I have to use it, let's say if someone wants to live a different path, or the Plato's allegory of cave, no one would want to just walk a different path, or people in your vicinity would try to bring you down. So they'll mock you, they'll shame others first, then they'll signal a sort of alignment that they have with those people. You are just different, it's your fault, and things like that. Not because deep within they have thought through those thinking, through those belief patterns, but they just are afraid to be an individual, and being an individual comes with its own set of choices, risks, and whatnot. And then you see that a lot of fear is cloaked as morality, weak morality. Nietzsche talks about it a lot, but probably I can just cover it in the upcoming videos. But this weak sense of morality is the most powerful force in a weak society, which likes to just moral police a lot without doing anything of worth in their lives. And the crowd always keeps on defending the system. People defend the systems that hurt them not because they benefit from it, but because admitting harm, that the system is exploiting us, would collapse their sense of identity. If the system is wrong, their obedience was meaningless. They would go into a sort of existential crisis. There would not be any meaning in their life. They'll then start understanding that the suffering, all of the suffering that they had suffered in their life, was unnecessary. So we just like to keep fooling ourselves, and the long term costs of it are very bad. And then you see how this whole system works, that from childhood they'll instill this pattern of shame into you only to bind you to the system, a pathetic system. And then even if you want to break out deep in your heart, you know about it, still you cannot. So there's a very good book which talks about it. It's called 1984 by George Orwell, wherein the person goes on a psychological warfare. And it's a very good book. If you want, I can cover it, but that's the core idea. And you always see that this emotion of shame, they always target the sensitive people, the weak people, not the powerful people, because it just does not exist to correct the corrupt people, if I can use the system, bring justice to the unfortunate ones. It just silences all thinkers, all thoughtful people. Those who already lack conscience are immune. They can do whatever the hell they want. So there's a very good video which the author of Subtle Art of Not Giving a F, which is Mark Mason, had just put out, that why do evil people succeed. You can just check that out. But essentially what he pointed in that video is that there's a three triad thing that exists among humans, which are psychopaths, Machiavellians, and narcissists. So the people who are already very high in that, they just don't care about it. It's only people with a conscience, with a little bit of empathy, that go into these patterns, that am I doing this right or not. So shame is very effective on these sorts of people who are just the normal crowd. All those people who are very high in narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism are exceptions, the anomalies. But I'm just talking about a shame from a general populist perspective. So it just affects a lot of thinkers, a lot of questions, a lot of creators on an individual level, a lot of ethical individuals, if I can use the term. This skews society. There's a weird imbalance of sorts towards obedience and not genuinely intelligently thinking. And then the whole media kind of comes in. You see that how media has always joined hand with the powerful, not because they value the truth or anything, that they just value their own benefit and their own money. We can just talk about in democracy how media is very powerful and things like that, but all of that is just hearsay. Anyhow, media reinforces this belief of shame. You see how much moralistic standards are took under the pretense of the nation wants to know and all of that bullshit. But in reality, it's just a tool wherein they are just signaling the nation that if you just try to walk a different path, this is how you'll be put in front of the jury. They would never question their exploiters, the people who are filling their pockets up and things like that. But it hides a lot behind virtue signaling, public outrage, social approval metrics, and things like that. It might look polite, but in reality, it's just a tool to control you. What matters is not truth, but alignment in a weird way wherein you can just be exploited by your exploiters. This is, if I refer back to that book described in the George Orwell 1984 reality. So we'll control you through fear, not any external force. You'll just self-censor yourself, because see, if people start coming in numbers, a lot of powerful people, quote unquote, would be powerless, because it's we the people who give them power in the first place. But anyhow, I think for that one requires a lot of education, breaking one's biases and things like that. But that's how it is. And then, as I had mentioned, that it's a subtle form of doing violence in the modern world. Violence is visible, shame is invisible. So a lot of people bind themselves because on an internal level they fear a lot of things, or they self-censor themselves. Whereas, let's say, if one wants to be violent, there would be like a lot of reputation threats, long-term enemies and things like that. But probably this is a very subtle tool which a lot of people use. And then it just destroys your inner authority, wherein you fear taking any action, thinking anything different. You fear standing with the truth, and your speech has this meekness about you wherein you're not very comfortable and standing with the truth. A lot of insights, a lot of expression is just self-centered. And then you start outsourcing your judgment to crowds, to trends, acceptable opinions. Because if you start walking, let's say, speaking the truth, or just walking in a path that you know is true to your heart, you'll just self-censor yourself. That is why it's a very good tool. And then I think that it feels necessary to society because it's often defended by all our teachers that it's discipline, these are standards, this is the culture, this is the order, but all of it is just changeable as per the times. But what really matters is the underlying predictability, that you're sort of this predictable person who wouldn't just think outside the box, do anything unpredictable. Because see, people who are free thinkers or free individuals are very unpredictable, and they can just change things through their art or anything for that matter. Predictable populations are easily controlled mobs, and they're just controllable by the exploiters. So that's why it's always framed as this essential thing, but in reality, the psychology behind it now. So what's the personal cost? On a long-term perspective, you'll have a lot of anxiety, chronic self-doubt, action paralysis. That is this the type of action that I want to do? People pleasing, emotional numbness, that you'll just stop feeling anything. There would be a sort of inner hollowness within you. But on a external level, you just wouldn't know how to express that to anyone. And then there's a classic saying that people would just survive, they would not live out their life fully. A population that keeps on surviving without questioning is the ultimate form of control for any person. So what can be the solution? Does it mean that we become shameless? I don't know. Does it mean that we walk a path wherein we are resistant to shame or these weird metrics that people place upon us, or just loving your freedom so much that you are just willing to reject all norms? So it's a choice that you have to make strategically, that what is it that you want to do with your life long term. I cannot tell you the answer. The only aim is to just do inversion thinking. Inversion basically means just thinking things which we don't want to do. So probably I think a better way to go about it is just separating your identity from, let's say, behavior. If you feel that someone is trying to instill shame upon you, don't take it too hard. If you're a student, college student, school student, or whatever, in whatever phase of life you're, let's say even if you're working, your idiot boss tells you that this is how things ought to be and things like that. Just valuing truth over approval, that is the most important thing. And accepting that it's okay to be alone. At least you're alone for the right battle. You're not alone for the wrong battle. But I think every independent mind, people who have done great things in their life and contributed a lot to humanity, has borne this cost. So accepting this cost is very important rather than running away from it, because see, in the long term, once this all is over, your life is gone. Or let's say you are towards the final stages of death and all of that. Do you think all of this would matter? Or would you just cry that you made yourself live a life in which you could have been great, but you did not make that choice to fight your exploiters? Because in reality, your exploiters just have 5 to 10 years at max. But over the long term, you lose out a lot because you have to live the longer term, and this cycle would keep on continuing. But yeah, those are some thought cycles. Let me know what you feel about it. I was just thinking through things because of some recent things that had happened, and how people effectively use this tool of shame, or employ this tool of shame, to just discipline you in weird ways, which is very weird because they themselves are not disciplined in any facet of life. But anyhow, let me know what you feel about it. Feel free to write your opinions, comments, and yeah, let's just make this a community of critical thinkers. I don't want a bloody mob here. You stay awesome. Write what limitations have you broken, and if you feel like having a one-on-one with me, feel free to drop an email to me. And yeah, this is Devashish Bindra. You stay awesome, and I'm signing off. Cheers.